Now let's move on to our next panel. The battle to go green is very, very tough. Many countries around the world are trying to adapt infrastructure that no longer makes sense. They're trying to gauge whether new green infrastructure will be resilient and whether they can finance the majority of the change with the backing of private capital. Then we have the flip side, regions that have not got any energy infrastructure at all, but they have an enormous potential if people are willing to build the sustainable energy infrastructure from scratch. So who is grappling with these big problems and what can we learn from them? Joining me today, I have Mansour Hamayoun, the CEO of Bbox, a pay-as-you-go solar power company operating in 12 African countries. Please come on up. We have Ricardo Botelho, the CEO of Energisa, a company that has brought clean energy to 23 million people across Brazil. We've got Pratik Agarwal, the managing director of Sterlite Power, a leading global developer of power transmission infrastructure. And we've got Felix Zhang, the group and executive director and venture partner of Envision Energy, which is a global company that manufactures, designs, and develops onshore and offshore wind turbines. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me. So we've got an incredible spread of people who have dealt with many different geographies and many different areas. And in fact, I feel like we've got both of the examples that I said in my introduction of people who have dealt with massive amounts of legacy infrastructure and people who deal with no infrastructure at all. So I'd like to start off perhaps with you, Mansour, if that's all right. Bbox is obviously offering people who have traditionally relied on coal an alternative to be able to power their homes. What are the challenges of trying to do that?
No, firstly, congrats to Octopus for hosting this event. It's awesome, and thanks for having me here. The first challenge is just the scale of the problem. There's 700 million people in Africa that have zero access to electricity at home. There are 3 billion people globally that still cook on charcoal and bad firewoods and things like that. So the scale of the problem is just enormous. And if you look at what households spend on really poor quality energy choices, so in places like Rwanda or Kenya or DRC, it's not that people are not spending on energy, they're spending on really bad sorts of energy. They're spending a large part of their disposable income on things like kerosene, candles, batteries small batteries for torches, diesel for generators, etc. So the opportunity that we saw was that actually, there is a huge challenge of scale, but at the same time, this is a huge addressable market that very few people have actually tried to enter into. And we live in an era where the technology exists. So what we do is we install solar panel on people's rooftops, we install batteries in people's homes, we put a smart meter inside the house, and also appliances that people need. And people pay using their mobile phones, using things like mobile money, which is very common now across Africa. When they pay, the system turns on. When they don't pay, the system turns off. And that daily rate of electricity becomes cheaper than what they were spending on bad stuff before, but a completely different experience. They get modern electricity for the first time. And I think that if I turn the challenge into the opportunity, what I'm describing happening in Africa, and we have 6 million customers across the continent, is really the future of energy as I see it globally. Where you want to be able to produce your own energy first, store your own energy, consume it, and share it if possible, right? That's the future of the energy grid. And the truth is that Africa, as it has leapfrogged in finance, from mobile money perspective or phones, I think what's happening in African energy is actually a blueprint for what's going to happen in retail energy globally. And that's what makes the continent so exciting to work at.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting because we've heard about the potential of Africa becoming a powerhouse, especially in light of the Ukraine war and people's reliance on Russian gas and oil. I suppose from the perspective of the global side of things, I wanted to touch upon Brazil because 2 of our speakers have experience in this field. I wanted to get a sense of, we're talking about Africa as a blueprint for what could happen globally. Now, Brazil is also a good example of a blueprint of what could happen globally as well, because we've got 2 different varieties of infrastructure challenges, the lack thereof and the too much. So can we travel over to Brazil for a second? Pratik, perhaps you can start. Can we find out a bit more about what does it mean to repurpose infrastructure, which is the flip side of what Mansour was saying.
Okay, let's put in perspective.
Ricardo, fine.
Hello? Really? Well, put a little bit of some facts in perspective about Brazil. Brazil is a very huge country, as everybody knows. It's larger than continental US, with exception of Alaska. And as the country grows, as the country gets bigger, the consumption, the rising social and economic levels of the people, we need more power. But throughout our history, we have done a lot of things to the country to become almost an example of a renewable and sustainable energy place. Just to have some idea, Brazil today has 15% of fossil base only. 85% is renewable. Mostly is hydro, but we also have a huge amount of solar and wind and biomass production. Also this year, which is a very good year, we had a lot of rainfall, the wind is blowing steadily. We had a record of 91% of energy produced by energy so far. And that's very cool, because if you compare to other places in the world, I mean, renewables energy accounts to no more than 26%. And if you look to all forms of energy, I'm not talking about energy for transportation, energy for buildings, energy for manufacturing, all kinds of fuels.
Yeah.
Brazil also is a good example for that. We have today approximately 43% of all energy consumption in Brazil, from renewable source, compared to about 14% in the rest of the world. If you look into about emissions, it's a great example also. Our energy emissions is only 18% of total gross emission of the country, compared to roughly 75% globally. So that's what we think we have managed to do. But in order to continue to grow, in order to continue to have energy supply to our people, the country is expected to double the per capita consumption until 2050. So that's why we have to be concerned about keeping this good track record. So we need policies, we need also infrastructure, especially to bring power that's been produced in some areas far away from the consumption, urban, industrial areas, moving powers to thousands of kilometers. And maybe Patrick, that's next to me, is a very good example of somebody that built those marvelous transmission backgrounds.
Absolutely, yeah. Patrick, can you explain, because you've got a background in doing exactly that in India and in Brazil, so could you tell us how you did it?
So thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a wonderful event. You know, as I sort of think about the next 20 or 30 years of rolling out renewable energy to meet net zero and to decarbonize the electricity system, I personally believe that one of the two biggest challenges in doing that is the availability of timely grid infrastructure at the right price point, right? And I think that's going to be the biggest bottleneck, and we have to collectively as an industry, between technology, policy, developers, come together and sort of solve that. Now, what I found very interesting in these two markets, India and most of LATAM, including Brazil, is that like here in the UK, the UK government has deregulated the retail end of the value chain, and that's why companies like Octopus can exist. Anybody can supply to anybody. What they did in LATAM and India is that they actually deregulated the transmission layer, which means that when something needs to be built, it's not built by one monopolistic entity. It is auctioned out to the person who builds it the cheapest and the fastest at standard. Now, this has been going on for about 10 or 12 years. At Sterlite Power, we were fortunate to win the first ever project auction in this model. We have now done about 16,000 kilometers in the two countries, about $9 billion of development. But our first project alone reduced the cost of transmission by 40%. And it increased the speed of the build out also by 40%. Because we were so deeply incentivized to somehow build that link on time that we would do anything. We would bring in helicopters, drones, and absolutely do anything to build it on time, right? So that kind of fierce energy is what's needed to build the grid on time. this is one huge learning, I think, that those two markets can give to the rest of the world. Because if there's one thing that's going to slow down decarbonization, it's the availability of the grid.
Yeah, Felix, the king of air. I imagine you face that kind of challenge all the time with offshore wind turbines and the availability of them and being able to make sure that they're providing the energy that we need. One question I wanted to ask, which is a similar thing to what Pratik was just saying. In Europe, in the last couple of days, they said that there was going to be a change, kind of similar to what you were saying about auctioning off, that Europe was going to have an objective of over 40%, similar to these other regions, of renewable energy by 2030. Is that feasible, in your opinion? What are your thoughts on, do we have enough energy? Because we have to rely a lot on wind to achieve that target, apparently.
Well, I'm not going to pretend I'm the expert on Europe, and I'll take a shot at it. And Envision will make turbines. We also have the only gigafactories here in the UK as well. And we're also doing energy storage for a lot of utility scale renewable energy plants. So when we look at Europe, we think there is huge prospect. It's very, very promising. And we have the largest investments in France last year, and 2.4 billion euro investments in France. And we have huge investments in Spain. But if you really look at it, whether it's renewables, whether it's variety of different products, like Octopus introduced even today, and my view is, we can do faster, right? I don't want to use China as an example. China set a target on 2035 to be net carbon zero, and I think we're going to do it. The reason we're going to do it is we are building this year over 200 gigawatts solar newly installed capacities. And we are installing about 60 to 70 gigawatts wind this year. And I think over next, 2035 is about 12 years from now. So we're basically going to install at least 300 to 400 gigawatts a year renewables. That's basically we're installing 2 France a year in terms of electricity installed capacities. And we will meet it, I think we'll meet it before 2035. And I think Europe can definitely, Europe have a lot of technology companies, have a lot of financing capabilities. So I have no doubt Europe can do it. And even better, I think the target is too low. Target can be much higher.
It's very true. How can tech play a role in all this? I know we've touched upon this a little bit in both you, Ricardo, and also you, Mansour, but how can tech play a part in accelerating change? Have you had any experience with things that have been groundbreaking that really everyone should be doing? Pratik, perhaps we start with you.
So as I said, right, I focus...
I can hear you, but can everyone hear him? Yeah? Yeah.
So we tend to focus on the plumbing of the clean energy world, which is really the wires and cables that go at the back, which we don't see. Now, which I think is the hardest bit. Now, in the US and parts of UK, it can take up to 10 years from the time you think of building a line to the time it gets built, right? And that's just unacceptable. With that, you'll never reach net zero. Yeah. What we found is once we have the incentives in place to build faster, better, cheaper, there's so many things you can do. For example, if you have to build a line from A to B, if you take the straight line, you will end up never building that line because of the number of challenges you'll encounter. You need a software like Google Directions to sort of go through hundreds of layers of data, and an algorithm should tell you the fastest built route, which could be not the straight line route. Right. That didn't exist and still doesn't exist in the world. So we had to build it ourselves, and we now have a beta version running which can do that. We use it around the world. That's just one example. In terms of actually building these pylons, the technology hasn't really improved in 40 years. And you have loads of people and labor and construction that has to go out to site. And in my view, there's really no reason why a swarm of drones can't build a transmission pylon as opposed to people. All the technology already exists. It's just the code that needs to get better, right? So, and then finally, when you talk of tech, the actual chemistry of the conducting element, which is the copper and the aluminum that ultimately carries all the electricity wherever it needs to go. Yep. Unfortunately, that technology hasn't really improved drastically in the last 30, 40 years either. And all of the effort that is going in, for example, of reducing the amount of nickel that goes into a battery, because nickel is expensive, that mindset needs to go in the grid. Like, who's thinking about reducing copper or replacing it in the long term, right?
Yeah.
So I think these things are really important.
Yeah, aside from the sort of the infrastructure side of things, Ricardo, I mean, you've got a very fast-growing population in Brazil. This faster, cheaper, using tech that Pratik was talking about, does that apply to your scenario?
We are pretty much a distribution network provider and also have retail. As you mentioned, we have about 26 million persons that we serve.
Yeah.
But there are still in Brazil, and Brazil has done a very good job in terms of universalization of the service. But we operate in very remote areas. Mm-hmm. Out of 9 distribution assets that we have, 4 are in the Amazon region. And that region still have, just to put in perspective, 99.8% of Brazilians have regular power.
Yep.
So 0.2% doesn't have, but still 1 million people doesn't have power, and another 3 million have isolated systems. So what we have done to actually think about this opportunity of how we can provide in the areas that we are more reliable and power where transmission lines or distribution lines cannot reach. So we took a 3-way approach. First, we went to the low-hanging fruits, where cities that have diesel generator, diesel gensets with 1,000 people living there, and it's this isolated, mm-hmm. not connected to the grid regions. But we had in the areas that we have no objections or no any difficulties to bring a distribution line. So we did this. We decommissioned 17 power plants in the last 3 years, replacing it for the energy from the grid. So that was the low-hanging fruit. The other approach that we took, it was to go after those 1 million, not in our territories, much less, but the 1 million Brazilians that doesn't have regular power. In this, in order to provide that, we developed a solution in-house that comprises of a small module of PV, a battery, and the PV battery for a home, a typical home that for people that live in those remote areas consume anything from 80 to 160 kilowatt hour per month. Mm-hmm. So that small set has to withstand heat, humidity, has to be easy also to be carried, because we have to put this in the middle of the jungle. So we have to carry on boats, canoes, tractors, horses, and be easy to install. So that's what we did. We developed this. We first applied this in an area, a very let's say a sanctuary in Brazil called the Pantanal, which is the swamp, mm-hmm. very beautiful place. We tested there with 3,000 homes. They work. So now we moved to the Amazon, and we are going to do 26,000 of those systems. They are very reliable. They work very well. They provide enough power for places that people could not have, not near close to a distribution line. And lastly, we test another solution not for individual persons that live in very remote areas, for small village that cannot be connected, those that are provided by isolated system. We start small, but we have a PV power plant of bigger size, a battery storage system, of 100, in the case 850 kilowatt hour, and also a diesel backup, a biodiesel backup. Mm-hmm. And that installation is a very good installation to provide reliable power for small communities. We have no outage for 2 years, better than many places that we live in the world, no outage at all. And this solution, we like to scale it. Right. We like to scale for those 3 million people that live on the isolated systems in clusters of thousands of homes. Mm-hmm. That's our goal. So in doing that, we can decarbonize pretty much the Amazon electrical system. It's a very costly, and it's a kind of pity that we have this good track record of clean energy, but right in the Amazon, we are, having a lot of fossil fuel being burned there and costing about $2 billion a year for the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's also part of the puzzle. Also has to be not just the technology, not just the infrastructure, but also convincing people that this is a better option, right? I mean, Mansour, you're appealing to people who often don't have a lot of competition for different types of energy, right? So it's not like they've got a plethora of energy providers knocking at their doors in rural sub-Saharan Africa to say, can we provide you with some gas? But how do you convince people? Because there is a cost, obviously, associated with having any of this technology installed in your home. We were talking about heat pumps earlier. Loads of people would like heat pumps, but often it's not feasible. How do you convince people to adopt this versus what they already had, the paraffin, the coal?
Actually, the lucky thing is we don't have to do any convincing. Electricity is so fundamental in ensuring an acceptable quality of life. If you can tell someone that for $1 a day, you will have a light bulb at home, you will be able to watch Premier League football tomorrow night, sold, right? so we have the exact opposite problem. The demand far outstrips the ability for us to supply and other structural issues around that. Another incredible thing is that although the first time people buy stuff from us is normally for the purpose of comfort and entertainment, right? The comfort of having light, the comfort of chilling your food, the comfort of, or the entertainment of watching sports, etc. But very quickly, does that comfort become entrepreneurial? Like one of the funniest statistics I have is that 1/3 of all barber shops in Rwanda are powered by us. So that means 1/3 of all haircuts are powered by us. So whenever I see short hair in Rwanda, I get excited. It's like a little bit of a contribution from our side on that outcome, right? And the role of technology as well, one of the things that were being discussed before is the data side. If you really look at the energy transition story, really, it's about going from a model that is B2G to C with B2G to B2C. There's always that G element there, right? And not to be an anarchist, I might be one, but the really cool thing here is that the future of energy is really B2C. Right, this is my personal view, right? And what is also the business model itself. We just go straight to your home. We provide you what you need at the affordability that you need, and that's the scale up. That whole G part we can remove, and actually that's the fact. That's how we've been able to scale in 10 countries in Africa, and it was really a demonstration of the fact that that G thing, we don't care. We will just go to people that actually want to do that. And the data side means that if I have all of this data on how people are paying, how people are consuming, there's two things I need to do really, really well. First thing I need to know is when will my next system fail? Yeah. I need to live in the future. I can't know that batteries are failing today because my call center will die, right? What I need to know is that this customer's battery will fail in 6 months' time. Let's make sure that we have the right spare parts available in rural Congo or rural Togo so that the right level of stock level exists. The second challenge, and I think this is a big climate aspect to it, who will pay and who will not pay me? Majority of my customers are smallholder farmers. They don't have a regular income. And one of the most surprising results that we have, and this is why I'm so deeply invested into this topic, is that if you give me the weather forecast in some of the locations, I can give you the cash forecast of how much money we will get. It's completely correlated to weather. In majority of our customers, actually, right? There's a single largest correlation. And if you look at the impact of climate change, where will it impact first? It's going to impact smallholder farmers first in developing nations. So actually, in some ways, I really see the privilege of Bbox being at the coal face, or where climate change is impacted really on a daily basis first, but also at the coal face of what are those climate tech solutions that we can actually implement, not just to advance people's economic well-being and life quality, but also to fight climate change from pure product perspective. So that makes life exciting, but yet I'm a bit worried about the future of the planet. Tim did a very good case for the hopefulness to forgive people.
Yeah, no. Can I throw the question out to the panel, because everyone's facing climate change issues, especially over this last summer. We've seen people who might not have been that aware of it suddenly be hit literally with climate change in the face, with floods, fires. It seems to be getting more and more drastic. What does this mean for the adoption and, I suppose, the urgency of creating or renewing infrastructure and making sure that it's sustainable? Perhaps you.
So I'd like to talk a bit about, Natasha, about our experience in supplying round-the-clock renewable energy to large industrial customers in India.
Right.
So about 2 years ago, we spotted an opportunity where regulations had opened up, and now an enterprise could go and set up, let's say, wind, solar, battery hybrid, and then over the grid, supply that to large customers in different parts of the country. Just to give you context, about 30% of the power consumption in India is by large commercial industrial establishments, which is about 600 terawatt hours a year, or about $20 billion of electricity. That will double in 8 years. So that's unique, right? You have a growing market, and that extra 600 million is not there today. It can be entirely green if you want it to be, which is the unique thing about, let's say, developing countries. Yeah. Now, what we did is we went after one sector. So the aluminum smelting industry contributes 2% of greenhouse gases globally, and it's highly electricity dependent. So we went after the largest aluminum smelter in India, and we gave them a product which will reduce their carbon emissions by 20% by end of next year. Mm-hmm. The moment we did that, and nobody else had done that at that scale using wind-solar hybrid before. People had done that using hydro in Russia, but never using wind-solar hybrid. We found that the next two smelters in India did exactly the same thing. And then the next two smelters in the Middle East are now talking about doing the exact same thing. And basically, you're setting off a chain reaction. I mean, I see a possibility where maybe 60-70% of aluminum smelters would have signed up for renewable energy, up to 25%. Now, that's incredible, right? Just the power of just triggering that chain reaction with that one idea of decarbonizing aluminum. So I'm very, very, very excited and hopeful that people want round-the-clock power. They want high-quality customer service, and if it's green, they will buy it at the right price.
Yeah, I want to give a chance, because we're getting quite a number of questions, to kind of do a slight lightning round and torture you in a nice sort of way with as many as I can. Felix, I'm going to start with you, because there's lots of questions about China. I've got a question here. It says, how is the rollout of renewables in China being funded? And how should the UK government fund similar ambitions?
I mean, UK, China is quite different. That's it. And when I try to get to that is, I think there's some deep, even cultural differences. And we have very high saving rate. And our saving rate is about 40%. So all the major infrastructure projects, China was able to build 20,000 high-speed train railways over 15 years. That's $2 trillion investments. And transmission line we talked earlier, and we're building 1,000 kV lines, ultra-high voltage transmission lines. 1 kilometer is, it's easily $100 million. Well, I mean, 1 kilometer, and we built many of that, and we invested over $1 trillion as well. I think the key here is might not be able to be replicated in UK because we have 40% saving rate, and all of this infrastructure, none of them is actually borrowed abroad. Yeah. It's all internally financed within China. Yeah. But I'm not saying that the UK is nothing. I think UK government has done what UK has done on the Green Investment Bank, and actually be able to really kickstart the offshore wind farms 10, 15 years ago. I think Green Investment Bank was very good. And I think, the financing cost over here, being a AAA countries, So if you use commercial project financings, commercial bankings, and maybe using US, which use tax equities, you can still actually finance those renewable projects relatively cheap compared to any other part of the world.
I mean, at the moment, the government's finding it a bit challenging, just to disclose, because it came under quite a lot of fire because the contracts for offshore wind, actually, no one wanted them commercially. So it's a bit tricky, isn't it? I wanted to ask another question, which I think is really pertinent, especially to people in the UK and in Europe and in places where there's infrastructure already. How do you get around the problem of NIMBYism? I guess maybe, Ricardo, you might be able to attest to this a bit. A lot of people want energy, they don't want to see it.
Their backyard, huh?
Yeah.
Yes, I see this happening a lot in the places like here where you have very limited space and people don't want to have those facilities interfere with the view. In our country, I mean, the environmental codes are very tough. They are very strict. That makes licensing also a nightmare, like here too. But I don't see this as being as much as a problem in the wind or in the solar business. There is one particular reason. Those projects are located in very poor areas. I mean, we have geographically, the generation of sun and wind is in the northeast coast. And that's not a very well-developed area, okay? So a lot of people lease their lands. They are glad to lease the land so you can put there your turbine. That's going to become an income for them for lifetime. So the best thing is to marry somebody that has a land plot where the turbine is it's going to be a rich man on that area. So that's what we have there. We don't see this happening, but the licensing process, especially for hydros, it's almost impossible today in Brazil, even run-of-the-river hydros. In the wind, because they are located in the areas, not a problem. And I see today another good trend, which is also going to solve an environment problem, which is called NIMBYism, is the biomethane and biogas production.
Yeah.
A lot of this waste has to be treated. People don't want to live nearby that. So that's why where we put these biodigesters and produce biogas and biomethane become a very good solution for any neighborhood that's living near a plant that produces those wastes.
Very good. I want to end just by asking you all to summarize the answer to this following question in one sentence. So each of you summarize it in one sentence. The question is, what is the key thing that countries with legacy systems can learn from your projects? And I'm going to pick on Mansour because he sat next to me.
I think the key thing is that the business model needs to change from to B2C. Whatever the path that is the future. People will produce their own electricity, consume it, and share it when possible.
Ricardo.
I would say there are three things that need taken care of for energy transition, which is security, accessibility, and sustainability. And we have to play the three together.
Pratik.
Bring more competition in the whole value chain.
Very good. Felix.
Well, I mean, I think legacy system is good in some ways, but there is a Chinese saying if you don't move forward, you're basically going backward. So I think that can do open innovations and global corporations is very important. So we cannot stand still, and we have to continue to improve, continue to learn, continue to work with others.
That's very good. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to this wonderful panel. Thank you. Thank you so much.